thank you very much for joining us. On today's episode, I am very, very, very excited because we're going to talk about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, and one of, I would say, a ton of fantastic arguments.
Yep.
So to kind of, by way of introduction, I should probably introduce folks to this idea. And to do so, I would like to use an analogy. And that analogy is, for cars, you have gas-powered vehicles and you have electric vehicles. And there is a big debate as to which one is better amongst car enthusiasts. And so it's not that you will ever actually solve the debate. I really don't think that you can do it. And I know there's directions and people are going to make all, and that's exactly the point of today's episode, is that in the speaker and sound world, we have a very classic similar debate, which is actually active versus passive. And we've been talking about this for 10 years, and I'm sure in another 10, we're going to keep talking about it. And it's going to be a lot of fun today. So it's going to be a ton of fun.
Lots of fun. We're not going to get in an argument at all.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. So to kind of lay out the ground rules and the terms, I think it's important that we kind of define what's the difference between an active speaker and a passive speaker. So to kick it off, Mark, why don't you just sort of give us from a technical perspective, the short and sweet version of it?
Okay. So really, it's pretty simple. With a passive speaker, it requires a separate outboard amplifier, whether that's an integrated amp, an AV receiver, or a power amp, to power the speaker. Your source connects to that integrated amp or receiver or whatever it is that you have. So if you're streaming music, you would play from your streaming music device, connect that to your receiver, and then your receiver has amplifiers built into it that then transfers the audio to the speakers. A powered speaker is essentially just going to take the amplifiers that are built into like an AV receiver or something along those lines, and they kind of reform them and put them inside of the speaker cabinets themselves. So instead of having a Denon receiver with speaker wire running to speakers, I now have my two Genelec stereo speakers that are going to be sitting right here next to me. They have a source connection on it, so if I'm again streaming music or something along those lines, or you'll see them used a lot in pro audio, you'll run out of a mixing board or something along those lines, and then they have a power plug on them, so the amplifier is built into the speaker cabinet, and that's where you get your sound.
That's right. Yeah, and I would just say, the best way to tell the difference is that if you look at the back of a speaker, some of them plug into the wall and actually get their power. And so the amp has got to be built into that cabinet. And if it doesn't, if it has a red and a black connection, or let's say it has two red and black connections, whatever it is, then you'll know that that's a passive speaker and it needs to be hooked up to some variation of a power amp. So the reason why I think there's a debate is because you end up with two very different kind of sounds and you get two very different approaches to your design, right? So Mark, why don't you kick us off with the passive side of things? What are some of the reasons that you would think that a passive speaker makes sense? Some of the benefits that come with that particular strategy? Sure.
So the biggest thing, you'll see passive speakers utilized in most in-home scenarios, by and large, by, I'm not going to put a number on it, but it's probably above 90%, right? Like it's rare that you'll see, it's rare that you'll see a pair of powered speakers in a traditional home setup, whether that's surround sound or distributed whole house music. And the reason why is that it's cheaper to run speaker wire than it is to have an electrical outlet put everywhere. and you can typically most powered speakers are bookshelf size. Just for the most part, there are a couple out there, like the KEF LS60s and some other powered speakers that have come along the past couple of years that are full range. But you typically can pick kind of the size of the speaker that you want to fit the size of the space that you're putting it in. So if it's distributed audio, I can do an in-ceiling speaker or an in-wall speaker or an invisible speaker, and it disappears into the space. If it's a listening room or just a traditional theater or something along those lines, I can pick an aesthetically pleasing speaker in the size that I want that's going to fit my space. But you also gain the ability to pick the type of amplification that you want and upgrade that down the line. And that's, again, why most homes do this, because everybody's different, right? If I sold you if I sold every one of my clients the same exact system, people aren't going to be happy because it's not customized to them, right? Most passive options, or passive just gives you that many more options, and I'll just kind of end it there.
Yep. Well, and I would, and I have historically, as you are about to find out, I really appreciate active speakers a lot. They are some of my favorite designs because I think on that side of the world, you have ease of simplicity. You have, I think, better sound quality potential. And I'll explain some of the reasons behind that. Not to say that you can't with the others, but when a manufacturer puts together a set of speakers, there's a guy who's the head, and this is true at every single company, a head sound guy that determines, well, what should that speaker sound like? What is accurate supposed to be? And he's got to figure that out, and they got to make a determination. How much treble, how much mids, how much bass, what is, the overall timbre or the tone or the sound, what's the imaging like, and they go through all of these different, metrics to sort of figure out, well, what's a good speaker gonna sound like? And when you have the active design, the manufacturer is now building the amplification specific to the driver. So whatever they think is supposed to be done, right, from a sound output perspective, that amplifier is then purpose built specific to that driver. So what you get out of one manufacturer's active speaker is not the same that you get out of a different manufacturer's. They're still different. Like, you still get to pick and choose what you think sounds best to you, but rather the design is now saying, I want my amplification to work sympathetically with that driver and with that specific cabinet design, and I want to take everything into account. I don't want to leave anything to chance that something is going to not sound the way that we want to intend. So I think from a design perspective, that strategy is equal but different, obviously, than customization based upon what you're doing. And so, like, I just think that active speakers give you an opportunity to have a more accurate sound, by and large, for whatever level of speaker you want to go for. So,
okay, all right. I'll accept that.
Yeah, and here's the ultimate proof in the pudding. You mentioned earlier that you thought that you don't have active speakers in distributed audio, and I would tell you that I think it's very important that you consider a company like Sonos, right? They have made a lot, and I mean a lot, of homes, whole home distributed audio zones, and they use active speakers to do that. You plug them in the wall, and then you connect them to your Wi-Fi, and they just work to make music in your house. So I agree they don't do the passive thing, but active is one of those strategies that is not dependent on having like a rack full of gear. And, I mean, I love racks, and I love racks full of gear. Like, I think they're awesome, but.
All right. So you got me there. I mean, So Dan and I, when we first kind of got we upgraded to our location to get kind of the more premium stuff, gosh, over 10 years ago, Dan and I used to sit in our listening room on nights over the summer when it wasn't busy, and we would listen to speaker after speaker after speaker. And I think when we first, grand opened, I don't think there was a speaker that Dan really liked.
That's fair. I was frustrated a lot.
Outside of maybe the Sonus Faber, like Olympica series, but even then, if they weren't, they needed a lot of power and
a lot of power.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which I think would be a caveat to my conversation earlier, is that there are certain passive speakers that if you buy them but you don't have the proper amplification, they're gonna not sound so good, right? There's a brand that we've had on this show before that is notorious for needing power, and that's not a bad thing. For most folks, that means, hey, I get to buy better stuff. But
right.
If it's coming down to budget, it means that you're going to have to spend more money, and that, may not work out for you. So maybe you have to go to a lower cost speaker or lower quality speaker just to, go along with the type of amplification you have. So, that would be probably the biggest con, in my opinion, to a passive speaker. And an active speaker, a powered speaker, the first time I ever ran into one would have been when I was in school for audio engineering. I mean, that's where you got it, right? Like, that's where you really kind of got into it.
Absolutely. I mean, in the pro side, almost every monitor that you look at, no matter what studio you go to, 90% of them are going to have active speakers, right? And it's because the concepts and the requirements of the speaker are very different than what you have in the home. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but to make it very, very abundantly clear, there's different strategies for mixing and mastering, recording, and what a speaker does from an output perspective may help or hinder a workflow, and that workflow is based upon the individual. So there's a very famous pair of speakers that I can't stand called KRKs. Okay. And it's not that they're a bad speaker. In fact, most studios use KRK speakers, but they over accentuate, in my opinion, a lot of treble frequencies. They're characterized as extremely bright. So you get to be very accurate in your mixing decisions because they have essentially a magnifying glass on the sound. It's great. It's awesome. Like, it does all these wonderful things to show off all the things that are there. But if you're not mixing, if you don't want that magnifying glass, if that's not part of your strategy, then they wouldn't be very good for you. So just as you have like an infinite amount of variability on the passive side, I think on the active side, you have just as much. It's just that you have to put everything in one box, right? You're just saying, let's put this and that together to make sure that we've controlled the output as much as possible. So,
Yep. And our buddies at KEF, I think, probably, in our residential side of the business, which is what we work in most of the time, have really kind of bridged the gap, so to speak, in between, what was acceptable, even 5 years ago for the stereo listening space, for home listening, right?
Absolutely.
So, like, when I was in school, Yamaha NS10s were on every mixing console, right? And they were the ugliest looking. I mean, they're just a black box with a white driver, and they were, one of the flattest speakers you listen to, but yeah, they weren't pretty. So KEF, a couple of years ago came out with that LS50 wireless, and now it's the Wireless 2. And they took a speaker that was passive that they knew already worked. The design worked. They made it in a couple of different colors, so from a design standpoint, it kind of could fit in different areas. And then they're like, "Hey, let's put our own amplification into it, so we can kind of guarantee the performance out of that speaker." And now they make. I think recently, Tavares, who's on our show several months ago, posted something on LinkedIn where dude who plays Superman, can't think of his name, had a pair of LS50 wireless 2s behind him in red. So, I mean, it was just one of the coolest things to see because I love that color. It would not match my house at all, but I would buy them immediately if
just because they're red.
If I needed more speakers, but I don't.
No, it's fair. And I think the other side of that argument on the passive, right? So one of the detriments is that you don't get to have access to certain type of amplification that I think is really outstanding. So, for example, one of my favorite amplifier companies is Macintosh. Another one is Mark Levinson. And those guys don't make active speakers for the most part. There was a couple of exceptions, RS100, RS200 for Mac. And I think, I understand. But as a general rule, their job is to make the best amplifier that they can make. And that allows you to pair that up with the best speaker, right, that you want, right, in the best tonality or timbre that you think is going to match and be appropriate. And so, like, I just don't, I don't look at something like that and say, well, the whole concept is out the window. Like, you have to design appropriate to the space and, to what the requirements are and to what the needs are and what your passion is. And if your passion is Mark Levinson amps, then guess what? You need to go passive to get access to that sound, because what they do is awesome. It's absolutely incredible and amazing. And I don't want to take away, right, in a sense, that idea. I just wish that Mark Levinson would also take that time to develop a speaker, because I'd love to hear if they did both sides.
For sure. I'm
sure it would be amazing. It's like, it would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and even, you brought up Macintosh, and they did have those that, RS100 and RS200, and they were like office music systems. Like, hey, I'm going to have it sitting over here on my desk, or I'm going to have it sitting up on a shelf somewhere. And I just wanted to have a blue meter in my office, essentially is what those were. They were pretty darn good for what they were. And again, they were designed around, from the bottom up, or the top down, however you want to say it, to perform based on the type of amplification or the amount of power they had already put into it. The RS200 had that kind of woofer on the bottom of it too, and it was pretty impressive. But again, it was not, you're not going to have 10 of those around your house, right? You're going to have, so I think if you go back to Kef, like, I had a pair of their LSXs, which is kind of the tier down. They were incredible speakers because they sat right here on my desk. I have LS50s now. It's the only reason why I don't have them anymore. But I could get, if I'd mix music on them, or just even listening to sound through this when I'm working, the type of soundstage that they provided, I'll bring up one of the first times I was listening to them, I was sitting right here in this desk, and I was talking with one of my old colleagues. He lives in Houston now, and his wife came in the room and was talking to him. I had my, we were like talking on Twitch or something like that, or he was streaming on Twitch, and it sounded like she came in the room behind me. I actually turned around and looked. So for this little $1,000 pair of bookshelf speakers, like, they do manufacture them to sound the best that they can for their size and the driver size. So.
Yep. Well, and I think, there's something to be said for this concept of putting all of the performance requirements together up front and at the beginning, right? And so that's the thing that I like about the active design. But I also appreciate that you might sit there and say, well, I don't want all my eggs in one basket. So one of the cons, right, and Sonos is a famous example of this, even though I love what they do, but the downside of it, a lot of their speakers, is you don't have any modularity. Once you get committed into that platform, that's it. And so if you buy a Sonos Play 1 or some variation of, typically you can't hook up a turntable to it. You got to go to the Play 5 that has the little auxiliary input in order to get, and then you got to make sure that you have the very specific type of turntable that has a phono preamp built into it. Otherwise, they're not going to talk to each other. And you got to get a special cable that has the red and white on one side and the auxiliary on the other, 3.5 to RCA. So if you don't do like all of these little requirements, well, then you can't use your speaker. And you're going, So there are some, you got to think through like that design, and you got to think through the specifications and the purpose before you jump one direction or another. So
for sure. I mean, I have, because I'm obsessed, I have Sonos speakers all over my house, and they do fit the need for the spaces that they're in. However, going back to, the aesthetics, that means I have to have a speaker in my bathroom somewhere, or in my guest bathroom, sitting on the sink, or in this case, one of our vendors sells a little shelf that it actually sits on. And I love my wife. She lets me get away with so much, but it's not the most aesthetically pleasing thing sitting, in the guest bathroom. But my mom appreciates it when she comes over and listens to music while she's getting ready. So that's important to me.
Yeah. And I don't think that you'll have an argument, again, going back to, purpose versus cost versus, aesthetics and, sound quality. And you've got kind of different pillars, right? And so I like to, explain it this way. There's aesthetics is one pillar, performance, right? Sound quality would be another. And then budget is going to be that final, big pillar. So as you're starting to make a decision, right, as to what you're going to want to do. Well, if I want the best aesthetics, you know what? Passive speaker or invisible speaker that goes up into the ceiling, probably going to be the way to go, right? And so I get the best aesthetics that way. And if I really want those things to sound good, I'm going to buy a nice amp, right, with a fair amount of power to make sure that they sound very clean and very clear and very accurate. And that, of course, is going to give me the biggest budget. Because those things are not super inexpensive, all things being relative, right? Compared to, say, a Sonos One, or what used to be their Play 3, or a Move or something along those lines, something that you can kind of carry around with you. You're going to spend a lot less money on that, but you are going to get less sound quality, and you are going to get less aesthetic performance because you got to see that thing. So there's this trade-off with everything, and so this is, I think, going back to it. It's not that it's an age-old debate, because everybody's going to have a different approach at a different time for a different reason. And you got to be willing to say, all right, even though historically I may have felt this way about it, the right thing to do in this situation is X, right? And these are the reasons why we think that. So, yep.
And that being said, what speakers are to your left and right now as you face your computer?
Kef.
Are they passive?
Reference. They are passive.
Okay.
Yeah, no, they are. They're reference ones. And they're bookshelves. And I have them hooked up to a Rotel amplifier and a Rotel Pre and Symphony IO from blanking on the name. I can't even. Apogee. Yeah. Forgive me. I wasn't planning on doing that, but yes, I do have passive speakers.
Now,
ask me what I had before these.
yeah. Well, and to be fair, what did you have before those? You did have powered speakers.
Yeah, LS50 Nocturnes.
But they were Kef, right?
Kef. Yeah. LS50 Nocturnes. Yeah.
So when we picked up Kef, that was we were sad to kind of lose. I was sad to really lose Sonos Faber, but Kef has been such a great partner with us, and they really truly do make one of the best sounding speakers, properly amplified, and I think it was the first time that I actually saw Dan truly happy when listening to a passive speaker in our listening room.
That's very, very, very true. And I think it makes sense. I mean, like, I'm a huge fan of a musical, aesthetic or a musical timbre. And I think what they do is just extremely precise and very quiet. And, I don't need to be a fanboy too much, but I really do appreciate their sound quite a bit in whatever format that they make them in. So what's an example, Mark, of active speakers that are extremely popular, maybe even too popular in the TV world, that a lot of folks would have access to and have bought and have used all the time?
Ooh. You mean like a soundbar? Is that kind of where you're going?
Yeah, okay. Soundbars.
Cool.
Why do people buy soundbars?
I thought you were going to be playing a trick on me there for a second.
Nope.
Yeah, soundbar. It is powered speaker, isn't it? It's an active speaker. Why do they do that? Well, A, TV speakers aren't great, but B, it's so that they can create a specific performance level based on the dollar amount that you're paying. So if you buy a $219.99 soundbar, it's going to have a specific sound for $219 compared to the $1,000 soundbar that's made by the same manufacturer. We'll say it's Samsung or LG or Sony.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yep. Most of those manufacturers outsource those to other companies anyway. Which you'll see, like, was it LG that partnered with Harman Kardon or something like that? And
yep.
Or Samsung did at one point. So it's LG's Meridian, right? So you have these even TV manufacturers now that are reaching back out to these premium, audio companies to manufacture better sound components, but they don't go as far as, there's not a Samsung passive speaker out there anymore. There's not a LG passive speaker because, most people aren't going to spend the money on that. They're going to put their name their money in a brand name like a Bowers & Wilkins or a Martin Logan or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that you're going to see a trend continuing. And like with all things, I'm sure the world is cyclical, right? So you're going to see a trend, I think, towards more active speakers. And I think it was at CES this year, Samsung announced a set of speakers that look like picture frames. And they're designed to mirror and match, I should say, not mirror. They should match their frame TV concept. And so you put a couple outlets up on the wall and you hang these things and you plug them in. You got to do a recessed outlet, if I remember correctly. But you have speakers on the side that are going to communicate wirelessly with the television. Now, I don't think anybody's going to listen to those things and say, I'm getting audiophile, right, or critical listening quality out of those things, right? And I think if you ask the Samsung engineers and designers, and they're not going to come at you and say, yeah, like we designed these things for critical listening. We wanted them to sound good, absolutely, right? But let's not, make them out to be something that they're not. The whole point of it is the aesthetic, right? And so I think you're going to find, because of frame TV's popularity and because of the move towards aesthetics, that so much of technology is leaning in that direction. How can I make it look good? How can I make it sound good and look good? I just don't want one thing. I want both, right? I want my cake and I want to eat it too. So I think you're going to see a lot more people going in an active speaker like a soundbar direction for that reason, because it just looks better, which I think is maybe the wrong way of looking at it in the past, but the right way of looking at it going forward.
I agree. That music frame thing is actually, pretty interesting. I will say, if anyone from Samsung's listening, next year, make the picture frame play your album artwork.
Oh.
I feel like that was a pretty big miss. I mean, yes, you can pair this to your television as a sound bar, but you can just do one. So it's not really surround sound or anything along those lines. It's really designed, in my opinion, it's designed more of a standalone music device. So if they would have had the ability to turn that thing on and boot up Pandora or whatever it is and show that album artwork on there, that would have taken it a step up, in my opinion. Not to disparage it. It's actually a cool new product, and I'm excited to actually hear it and see it, which I think we're actually going to have it next week. So I'm pretty excited to see that. Maybe we'll put some pictures up on our socials.
That is correct, if we have an opportunity to get those things on display. And I was talking with someone the other week, and I think that's going to be the plan. And anyway, to make a long story short, I think the aesthetic drive is the thing that you have to get back to. And if it works with the aesthetic and a powered speaker is able to accomplish that, then you're going to see that. I think going back to it again, there are certain applications where an active speaker would be a bad idea, like just categorically. So where, Mark, if I was to say you should never use an active speaker, what would that application be?
So, I think it was during the pandemic. I mean, there's been all these, reels and TikToks and things like that are popping up of companies doing AV work. And there was one like a year or two ago where somebody had an in-ceiling speaker that they were putting in. It looked like an in-ceiling speaker, excuse me. They cut the hole and they put this thing in, and it was a Sonos Play One sealed into this like in-ceiling speaker frame with a grill over it. Now, I don't know. We don't know the whole story. Was it, was there a power out? Maybe there was a light there. And my guess is there's already a speaker there. I mean, in that video, it was a new house. It looked like a new house anyway. It looked brand new.
Yeah, so, it did look brand new.
I mean, hey, that speaker weighs like 10 pounds, 8 pounds, something like that. Yep. And I don't care over time. Like, there wasn't a belt around it. I don't know if it like squeezed the speaker or so. I don't know how it held it in there, but like that, you're just making your life really hard. I mean, there are way better in-ceiling speakers for what you paid to have that put in the ceiling. Yeah. There's Bluetooth versions of them out there too. And I understand that Bluetooth is what everybody hears because, everybody listens to music on AirPods. But, at home, if you're going to put something in the ceiling, definitely go passive. You're going to find a lot better options when it comes to the speakers themselves. And you can still connect it to Sonos with the magical Sonos amp. So you're not losing functionality.
Yep. Well, and that's exactly, I'm so glad you brought it up. I wasn't even thinking of it, but it's pure genius because you already cut a hole. You already ran Romex. It's a wire that you had to run to get it over there. So what was the thought process behind, doing, and you still see a grill. So you didn't win anything aesthetically. It didn't make any sense.
Yeah. It was crazy.
I would say the other application is outside. You really should never have an active speaker outside, permanently installed, ready to get wet and rained on and exposed to the elements. It just does not make any sense. Nobody makes outdoor amplification for this reason. That's the part of the electronics that will be damaged and destroyed by water and weather and humidity and bugs and all the other things that come along with dust. That comes along with the outside. So let's just not do that.
Yeah. Don't put, if you do passive, don't put the receiver outside with it because it's the same thing. It's just going to get destroyed. It's just going to get destroyed unless you have the Sonos Roam, Move, or an outdoor rated Bluetooth speaker. But again, we're talking about your home. This is going to be a permanent solution. So let's do it right and get you a pair of speakers out there.
Well, and I think that's exactly right to say, in the case of the Move, right? You don't leave it out there. You have to charge it, right? It's one of those things that it's very, designed they knew, bring that inside if it starts to rain because you don't want to burn $400 for no reason. So
sure.
Okay. Well, I think we've kind of gone through a bunch of different applications. If you had an unlimited budget, Mark, would you buy an active set of speakers or a passive set of speakers, and why?
Throwing me under the bus, Dan.
Yeah, 1,000%.
I'd probably do passive. It depends on the room I'm in, I should say. If I were in, I'm going to be moving my office over the next couple of months, so you'll notice my background change here soon, hopefully. I live in a townhome, like I've said 100 times before. These rooms really aren't conducive to proper placement for surround sound. But if I were moving into that, when I move into that office, it's going to be a little bit more squared off. I don't have a closet behind me. It'll actually be a wall. I would consider doing active speakers depending on how I could do it. But right now I have a pair of passive speakers in the ceiling in that room.
Yep.
But just a pair. But if I were going to get into mixing or something along those lines, I'd probably consider active. If I didn't live in this house and budget was unlimited, I would do a passive speaker and powered up with Mark Levinson or Macintosh or something like that, or maybe some other niche brand above that I'd have access to at that point.
Yeah, like D'Agostino or some crazy, something that's just absolutely insane. There's companies out there, $40,000-$50,000 for a mono block, and you're going like, man, get yourself a VPI turntable and listen. It's the reason why I asked the question, because I think at the end of the day, when you can hyper specialize, right? And it goes against my own argument, I think, in this particular case. But because you can specialize the amplification, because you can specialize the cables, because you can specialize the speakers themselves, because you can specialize the room, by the time it's all said and done, you're going to design that system to the client's specification. And in the end, you'll end up going passive, I think, 9 times out of 10. But I would say that there's something about the way active speakers work and their practicality and their usability and all that kind of stuff that, I still do have a sweet spot for it.
For sure.
So, all right.
I was going to say, your buddy Steve that was on our podcast.
Oh, yeah.
He has a mix of in his system, if I recall. So,
absolutely. Yeah. He's got Dines and Genelec, I think, if I remember correctly. I'll have to ask him to double check. Steve, if you're listening, shoot me a message sometime. Let me know exactly what it is that you have in the studio. And I know for a fact that most studios, right, will use active speakers. But I did work for a guy over a decade ago out in Los Angeles, and that studio was all passive speakers. And part of my routine when I would walk in, I'd have to open up shop, so to speak. And so, you flip the lights on and I'd walk over to the rack and I'd flip on, all the amplifiers and get them up and running and turn on the computer. And I had kind of like the boot up sequence that we had to do. And I definitely remember passive speakers in that space. And we had a visitor come in, different studio owner, and he was amazed at how good that the room sounded and how good the system sounded. He was like, I can't believe that you're getting this kind of thing, but it was the match of the speaker to the amp that really kind of made sure that things sounded the way that they were supposed to. So if you do it right, in theory, it shouldn't matter, right? But, I still think, ease of use, simplicity, I don't know. I just love active speakers.
Yeah, I know. I know you do. I know.
So, all right. So I was going to ask you if you wanted to do some demo tracks. How do you feel about some demo tracks?
I knew you were going to ask me that question.
Yes.
I knew it.
Yes.
Hold, please.
Any good stuff that you've been listening to recently?
Good stuff. It's good stuff for me. I don't know if you'll like it.
Fair enough. That's.
I actually this week, last night, demoed. I was listening to the album "The Midsummer Station" by Owl City, which I've used a couple of his tracks for demos in the past. And say what you will, I mean, there's some really silly lyrics and stuff like that on some of it, but from a musicianship standpoint, a lot of his stuff is top notch. And there's a song called Embers, which is on the Midsummer Station. That was one of his bigger albums outside of the one with Fireflies on it. And the beginning of it has some really hard bass hits. Like, I mean, I was driving my truck at first on my way home, and I had these things turned up pretty loud, and it was like a kick drum hit me in the chest. And then there's a part in the middle where the guitar comes in, and I don't know. It just I like the song, I like the lyrics, but just musically, it's very electronic too. So he has a lot of keyboard solos, or I'm going to say keyboard. He's using a keyboard, but using some other type of MIDI sound of some sort. So that one. And that's all I got wrote down. You go, and maybe I'll find the other one. I'm trying to remember it. I listen to so much music, it's just hard to remember the.
That's fair. Well, I have two. One's an old one, which is some classic artists, which some people will hate and some people will love, and it doesn't matter. It's Genesis. I Can't Dance. It is a band, admittedly, that I just never listened to growing up. Just as, I was kind of like just after the 80s, I was more into like 90s alternative and grunge and stuff like that. And I had older siblings that used to listen to Genesis. And I think categorically dismissed them. And I want to say probably like a month ago or so, I'm in a supermarket listening, and the song comes on, and I'm going, what on earth? That sounds fantastic. And of course, that's what it is. It's Genesis. And I go, oh, that's what was going on for years and years and years. I went back, I've listened to their whole catalog, and, give them a chance. And it's like, holy smokes, man, this guy really understood production. He really understands music. And even if it's maybe not your style, I think there's a ton of good stuff in there. So good old fashioned classic Genesis. And then a new artist, Gabriel Kahane, has a record called The Ambassador. And this guy just really understands songwriting. He understands music at a very high level. So if you're a music nerd and you really love, things that are very complex, from a composition standpoint, but listenable, very key. Still listenable. You don't have to be a music major to follow along. But his song is called Empire Liquor Mart. And it is just awesome. Absolutely fantastically recorded, tons of instrumentation, and it's a very dynamic song. It goes in a million different directions. It's like 9 minutes. So you got to really, strap in and get there, but absolutely fantastic. And so highly, highly recommend check out Gabriel Kahane.
All right. Diamonds on the Soles of Her Shoes is what I listened to again recently, and that was
yes,
we may even talked about, but that's a incredibly done song. And you brought up Genesis and Phil Collins being in that group. Like anything that he's done, I'll go back and listen to, including soundtracks. So like Lion King, Tarzan, like the production value in those is top notch. And I'm going to say it, whatever. One of my favorite tracks that he's done is it was a re-record of Trash in the Camp from Tarzan.
Yep.
With NSYNC.
Yep.
I don't know if you've listened to it. Give it a listen. It's a great demo track. If you've not seen the movie, then go watch it. But go listen to the track. It's awesome.
Yep. I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, excellent. Plenty of stuff to listen to. And as such, I would just like to say thank you so much for listening to us and for joining us on The Sound of Design.
With Mark.
And Dan. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Reach out if you guys have questions, feedback. We'd love to hear from you. And you can do so at thesoundofdesign.com. And we will see you guys on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you.